This is college football's Conference of Misfits. The idea here is that there's a lot of schools across the country that are not getting what they're worth, either because they're in a conference outside the Power 2 and in some cases are actively trying to get out of that conference, or they're within the Power 2 but they don't have a media rights deal that's equal to the rest of the conference. And it just seems like there's this inevitable slide of every valuable team being within the Big Ten or SEC footprint by the time we get to the next media rights deal for the college football playoff. But what if there's another way? And I've been playing with this idea for a while, but there's something that happened or a report that came out in the last 2 weeks that has really kind of given me an idea of how this could realistically happen. I'm not saying that it will happen, but this is at least a path that it could go towards. So a couple weeks ago, a report came out that the Big Ten was looking into private equity as a way to infuse cash into their conference. The idea here is that some private equity firm, I don't know the names of them, were going to put $2 billion into the Big Ten, and they weren't going to buy out the conference. What they were going to do is create a new share of conference revenue that they would then buy into. So currently there's 19 shares of conference revenue within the Big Ten, 18 for the member schools, 1 for the conference. They would create a 20th share that the private equity firm would then buy out and become a equal member of whatever revenue comes from the conference, media rights, college football playoff, and so on. While I understand the logic behind this, as a Ducks fan, it kind of pissed me off because if you didn't know, Oregon and Washington, when they joined the Pac-10 in 2023 to start in 2024, agreed on taking a half media rights share until 2030. So essentially for the first 6 years that they're in the conference so that they could join the conference. And there's a whole set of circumstances that allowed this to happen. Mainly that USC and UCLA blocked conference expansion in response to Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC, which could have put the Pac-12 at a stronger position if they were to go pluck teams from the Big 12 and get a better media rights deal. But instead, USC and UCLA blocked conference expansion, then blindsided the entire conference by joining the Big 10. And as part of their agreement with the Big 10 to join the Big 10, they did not want any other Pac-10 teams or Pac-12 teams to be able to join the conference. Oregon and Washington agreed to half media rights deals because they did not want to be stuck in the sinking ship that was the Pac-9 at that point after USC, UCLA, and Colorado had all already left the conference. So they then went and joined the Big 10 with half media rights deals for this first 6-year period. Now, if you're an Oregon Duck or even a Washington, but especially Oregon Duck fan, you have to look at this and say, wait, we've been the most dominant team in the conference in the regular season. We've got the most additional games outside of what Ohio State, I guess Penn State got more games last year, but they're not making the playoff this year. And we're going to get half of what Purdue is getting. We're going to get half of what fucking Illinois or half of what Northwestern is getting from the media rights deals. That's almost certainly, yes, they weren't bought with Oregon being in mind, but they're definitely making a lot more money off of Oregon because Oregon's the one that's on Big Ten Saturday night. It's not Northwestern. So it got me thinking that if this path to private equity being a major part of college football, which I don't think it's a good idea for college football, but it seems inevitable that every single sports organization is going to find a way to let private equity in because they're so greedy, that if that's the path, why wouldn't a private equity firm come in and create their own conference where they can have more than just an equal share to someone like Northwestern? They could have their own outsized share if they put the conference together. So with all that said, I'm going to show you the 20 teams that I think would form this Conference of Misfits under some unnamed private equity or massive firm that would put this together, and give small reasons for why each of these teams would decide to abandon their current position for this new conference. Now, because this conference is so large and spread across the country, we're going to go with 4 different 5-team divisions. We'll go division by division and give you a little bit about why each team would join this conference. Starting with the Northwest, we've got Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Utah, and BYU. You could probably also call this conference the Pac-5 because outside of BYU, all of these teams are a part of the Pac-12. All of these teams are super popular. Colorado has had the roughest of the last 4 seasons, because before Deion Sanders got there, the viewership was terrible. But now they're one of the top 5 teams in the country as far as viewership, at least over the past 2 seasons. It'll be interesting to see what this season looked like without Shadur, without Travis Hunter, and with them struggling a little bit more. But either way, this is probably one of the powerhouse divisions, one of the top 2 divisions, maybe the top division in the conference, with as far as viewership is concerned, as far as interest is concerned, and candidly, as far as teams are concerned, especially led the way by Oregon, being one of the best teams in the country. And of course, it doesn't necessarily realistically make sense for Oregon Washington to go through all the work of taking the half-meter rights deal, getting into the Big Ten, and jumping ship, unless they have some other incentive. And really, I think that this probably would not be an equal shares conference, but the total of the whole might be more than what these other teams could get in the Big 12 or in the ACC. So it might be worth all those teams joining up for this conference. Next, let's go with the Southwest Division. This is Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and Iowa State. I know Iowa State is in the Southwest, and it's going to get even nuttier when we get further on as far as the directionals for this, but it gets a little difficult because we're melding all the things together. So Iowa State fits the best in this particular division. This is probably, there's 2 strong divisions and 2 weak divisions as far as average viewership is concerned. Texas Tech is one of the 2 teams in this entire conference that has not had a season in which they've averaged over 1 million viewers in the past 4 seasons. But Texas Tech is one of the most, the most interesting team and school and program of the next 5 years of college football. Because they put so much money in their program, they are so much more talent rich than they've ever been. They'll probably have their best season in school history. This year, they're a top 10 team right now, which is very few and far between. And definitely with the 12-team playoff, getting a playoff game, maybe in Lubbock, would be an incredible accomplishment for Texas Tech. With that added focus on investing in their program, can they start to gain more fans outside of the Lubbock area? Can they start to take over some of the Big 12 fans that maybe, or fans that feel jaded by Oklahoma and Texas leaving the Big 12 and kind of the steps that they've taken to secure their own future? Can Texas Tech take some of those fans and take some national fans and gain some national interest? They definitely will gain national interest just from being good, but the way they're running their program might also add to that. I don't think that you can have this conference of non-Big 2 schools and not include Texas Tech, even if they haven't had the same success with viewership over the past 4 seasons that maybe the rest of the schools have had. Oklahoma State is also interesting here because you might not think about it, but only Oregon, Oklahoma State, Florida State, and Clemson have averaged over 1 million viewers in each of the past 4 seasons that are teams included in this conference. So really, Oklahoma State, Florida State, and Clemson are the only teams in the country that have averaged over 1 million viewers per season over the past 4 seasons that are not currently in the Big Ten or the SEC. So Oklahoma State, although they've struggled, has retained their viewership. We'll see if that continues this season after they fired Mike Gundy and having probably one of their worst seasons in program history. But they have stayed afloat as far as viewership is concerned, even with their struggles over the past 4 seasons. Next, we'll do the other somewhat weak division. We're going to do the Northeast, and this includes West Virginia, Virginia, Louisville, Kansas, and Kansas State. Like I said, Kansas and Kansas State are not Northeast. Iowa State is definitely more Northeast than they are, but we wanted the Kansas States to stay together, and the Kansas schools to stay together. And again, Virginia is the only other school in this conference that has not averaged 1 million viewers in at least 1 season in the past 4 years that's in this conference, them and Texas Tech. Virginia, the reason they're in the conference is because they've been a very popular team for both the Big Ten and the SEC, wanting to add to get that market. I thought, well, this conference might be able to incentivize them a little bit more to join the conference, since they would probably value that market even more so than the Big Ten or the SEC, to go along with West Virginia, Louisville, Kansas, and Kansas State. Of course, this is kind of a weak division as far as football success as well, but we'll talk about more about what those divisions mean once we get all the teams in. Finally, the Southeast. This is Georgia Tech, Florida State, Miami, Clemson, and North Carolina. this is just all of the best teams in the ACC, our most popular teams in the ACC. And I think the interesting one here is Miami, because Miami hasn't really been good. They've gotten more viewers as they've gotten good. And I think that in a town like Miami, or for a school like Miami, being good is super important to your viewership. They will go up and down more than most teams in the country based on how good they are in a given season, just because there's so many sports in Miami and it's a very specific market. But Miami is one of the greatest college football programs in the history of the country. So if they are good, if they do make the playoff, if they are as good as they seem like they are this season, and they make it to the playoff and make a run to the national championship, and Cristobal can keep that going for a long time, Miami becomes so much more valuable than they have been before, this current run of success, before really up until last season, where they've been a true national contender. So Florida State is always going to keep their, popularity. It's just that's a much different side of Florida. That's more of the South. Miami is its own thing. Clemson has been one of the most popular teams in the country. That will be interesting to see if they stay as popular with their success falling off a little bit this season, but still they have continued to be one of the most popular teams in the country, and they are, I think, the second most popular team behind Florida State, maybe behind Oregon for the last 4 seasons as far as viewership in this entire setup. Of course, Georgia Tech and UNC are some of the more popular teams as well. So what these divisions are meant to do is to lower the travel cost, because this conference, while it will get a great media rights deal if it was put together, it would not be the same level as the SEC, and definitely not the Big Ten. The Big Ten, with its massive expanse at this point that goes from sea to shining sea, is kind of covered by the media rights deal that they get, but it is for sure a strain on these athletic departments to have to fly back and forth across the country each week for college football. Of course, that is even worse for basketball, and then when you get into, Olympic sports and women's sports, things like that, it becomes an absolute strain for those programs to be able to keep those teams up when they have to travel so much. So the division is supposed to cut down on the travel strain and allow for regional competition to exist while still having this nationwide conference. So with that, the scheduling requirements for this conference is that each team will play each of their divisional opponents every single season, all 4 of the divisional opponents every single season. They'll also play a team from each of the other divisions every single season, leaving one leftover wildcard conference game. So if there's a rivalry that develops between teams that are in different divisions, for instance, if Washington and West Virginia, for some reason, get a rivalry just because of how some games go, or they meet in a conference championship game or whatever it is, that could be a scheduled game, or it could just be a random game each season. Outside of that, there will also be a requirement to play one team from the Big Ten or the SEC each season. Then you can do what you want to with the other 2 non-conference games. That, if you're keeping track at home, is only 11 games. The 12th game will be the first round of the 4-team conference playoff. So each divisional winner will be ranked 1 through 4 based on a series of tiebreakers, starting with win-loss, conference win-loss, and so on. 1 through 4, or 1 and 4, and 2 and 3 will play for the right to be in the conference championship game. The rest of the teams in the conference will play a team that ended in the same seed as them from another division. So 2s will play 2s, 3s will play 3s, 4s, 5s, all the way down the line. That'll be kind of randomized, but you will play someone from the same finishing spot as you in another division. It's really because the idea of this conference is to allow teams to play a somewhat more regional schedule while still being a part of a national conference. And it's much easier for the SEC at this point to pull that off. But with the Big Ten, you've got these teams, especially the coastal teams, flying back and forth across the country every single week. And it's killing not just college football, the struggle with college football, but it's killing all of these smaller sports that will never be able to keep up, women's sports, Olympic sports, all those kind of things, as we get further and further into this. Maybe you can float it for a couple seasons, but at some point it just doesn't make sense to continue to sponsor some of these sports, regardless of how much money you're making in media rights from football. And from a football perspective, these are teams that have value that for whatever reason is being suppressed by the situation they're currently in as opposed to the rest of the college football landscape. Now, I'm just like you. I wish that we could go back to 5 or 6 conferences that have the biggest teams in the country, that are 10-team conferences, that can compete against teams from states that are bordering you or at least somewhat close to where you are. But that's just not what college football is anymore. And as I pointed out in my video from last week where I rebuilt a 1996 conference realignment, a realignment remix, it hasn't been that way and was never going to be that way starting in the 90s, starting when national championships became the most important things in college football as opposed to the regular season. So yes, this conference is not the Big Ten. It's not the SEC. In some ways, it's not supposed to be. In other ways, it never would be. There are teams in programs in those conferences that will always outpace whoever, and they're heliocentric conferences that are built around those teams, like the Ohio States, the Michigans. Maybe you throw USC in there, the Penn States, these top-level blue blood schools. Maybe Penn State is not one of those blue blood schools that are in massive metro areas, or the SEC that have schools like Texas, like Alabama, like Georgia, like Florida, that have been there since the beginning in college football. This conference, yes, it has some of those schools that have been there for a long time, like Miami and Florida State and BYU, but it also has schools that are trying to invest and become one of those programs, like we've seen Oregon over the past 25 years, Washington, who has been up and down, even though they've been a kind of classic school, or teams like Texas Tech that are trying to invest now to be at the top of the country as we see college football move into this new era. And again, I don't think that this is super realistic for this to actually happen, but I do see a path for this to happen if things go the way that they're currently going, which is to say these top-level teams are not just trying to get all of the best schools or all the most valuable schools into their conference, but they're trying to get them into their conference and screw them over at the same time, trying to get everything they can out of them while not giving enough back. And Oregon and Washington are the first example of that, with Florida State and Clemson and North Carolina and Virginia and all these schools in the ACC trying to find their way out to get to these new conferences before it's too late. They have all of the leverage. The Big Ten and the SEC have all of the leverage because they are just squeezing everything else out. If these teams were to get together and say, you know what, there's another way. Maybe it's not the absolute best way, but there's another way where we're not going to get squeezed out of what we're worth. Even if you could make us worth slightly more, we're going to be worth all we can be worth and not be worth 50% of what we're worth because you are going to make the deal that way because you have all the leverage. But thanks for watching that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe and hype the video. It gets me on a leaderboard with small content creators, and I could use all the help I can get. And if you made it this far, leave a comment and let me know what you think. Do you think there's any reality in which this could happen? If it was to happen this way, do you think these are the right teams to be in there? Or is there anybody else that might want to jump out of the Power 2 conferences or be pulled up from a different conference to be a part of this college football conference of misfits? If you want to watch more of my videos, I do have those for you. I mentioned the video I did last week, which is a realignment remix. It's a new series I'm doing where I take an important moment within realignment history and say, what if it went differently? This time is the formation of the Pac-12, or the Big 12. So check that out if you're interested. Other than that, I got one of my most popular videos up here, which is the Perfect Power 8, which is still doing well. So check that one out if you haven't seen it yet. Other than that, I got my subscribe link on this side, and we'll check you next time. See ya!